Hello, Kenny. How are you?
Doing great, thank God. How are you?
Thank God well. How was your Pesach?
It was a whirlwind. It was a whirlwind. I can't I can't believe it's started and done already. I feel like we were just here and I was looking forward to it, and it's my favorite Yontif. I love it and I enjoyed it immensely. We were in Florida. I think my wife allows me to say that now. And in fact, I don't like even saying where I go because I don't need people bothering me in the few moments I have off in my life. So but it was really great, and focused to what we talk about here. We drank some great wines. How about you?
Same here. We were first days in Montreal and last days. I'm actually still in Florida right now. And
I can
we
tell by the sun shining on your beard.
exactly. We had some amazing, amazing wines. Some of the wines that we spoke about on our last episode. I'll tell you something funny. So at the end of our second Seder, we were doing Echad Miyodea, and we got to 17 and we were stuck. And then one of my kids said, actually, there's 17 bottles of open wine on the table.
That's amazing. You're doing something right then.
And so,
That's amazing. I love that. I don't have any great stories like that specifically, but we also drink some great wines. It's funny because both you and I are having obviously very busy days and getting, I guess, regular life back together. The first day after, at least I traveled, and it's like my first full day. And we just reached out to each other and like, let's try to get a podcast in. And I'm telling the story to everyone else is that, you told me, you're like, I'm going to be talking about this one specific wine. And I'm like, wait, why? Because you read the thing I wrote last night? You're like, no. And that's amazingly, we had the same wine to discuss, which I thought was so funny. Um, but do you want to introduce it or should I? I think we should dive right into it.
I think we should dive right into it. To me, I had no idea that you just wrote about it. So I'm really excited to hear more than I already know about it. I happened to buy it before Pesach. I just saw it and I said, this is going to be interesting. And at the second
Right.
Seder, I opened it up and we had a lot of wine. There were 17 open bottles at the end of the second Seder. We had a lot of wine. And I served it, I think, right after Shulchan Aruch. So for the third glass, we opened it up. And then everybody was like, wow, this is a
Right.
shocker. I never
I
had
think
anything like this.
I think that's a great thing. I was thinking about it. I drank it on the last day of Pesach. We had it with lunch, and I was thinking what a great wine that would be for a Seder wine because it covers a lot of bases. And what we're talking about, of course, is the Dalton Pet Nat. And Pet Nat is short for Pétillant Naturel. It's a bubbling,
Very good
sparkling
French.
wine. I read it 10 times last night when I was, so there was some prep and a little bit of college French, I guess. But I'm not from Montreal. You have that over me. Um, and I love sparkling wine. This is the another term for it is it's made in the method, and of course I'm not pronouncing that the French way. Méthode, is that correct?
Yeah, no, that's good. You're good.
Méthode ancestrale.
Yes.
I'm probably butchering
You
it,
are butchering
but
it, but it sounds amazing.
the ancestral method. And why is it called the ancestral method? It's because it was made since like the 1500s, known that it was made since the 1500s. And like champagne, also made by accident. What happened? What happens when you ferment anything? If fermentation is not done and the wine is in the bottle, it's going to continue fermenting. And of course, we see that nowadays as somewhat of a fault. I mean, if the winemaker's not expecting that to happen and it's still undergoing fermentation, that ends up often being a problem. In this case, it's only undergoing one fermentation. It goes through this single fermentation, which is in the bottle. So it's kind of like almost like half-made wine.
Yeah.
It was found kind of by accident. The rumor has it that some monk in the 1500s discovered this, and then really it kind of was on the back burner until the late 20th century, and French kind of maverick winemaker. His name is not in front of me. I think it's Christian Schusan or something. I have to look. He was known for being a natural winemaker, and he kind of fell upon this again. And then, as like Yaakov Oria from our world, he was just an experimenter, and he started playing around with it, and it gained popularity. And he was in the Loire Valley, which is kind of a perfect place for Pet Nat, and it's grown to become trendy, I would say. And as I wrote in the thing I wrote up last night, I think, and this isn't a criticism, but the kosher world, as we all know, lags behind. It lags behind on food trends. It lags behind on wine trends. We catch up eventually, but we always run a little behind. I think we saw that with rosé. Rosé gained a lot of popularity in the kosher wine world recently, and then it's kind of maybe like stalled a little bit because then it got flooded with too many rosés.
Right.
Everyone's making a rosé. And I think it's Pet Nat's turn. And something I mentioned briefly, but I would love to speak to some Israeli winemakers about is I think this is, and of course the one we're talking about, Dalton, is an Israeli wine. I think it's a really great opportunity for Israeli winemakers to make these. They're fun and they're refreshing and they're lower in alcohol also, and all these things make sense for the Israeli climate and for like the Israeli population, which is young and energetic, and it's a hot climate. And it's, we always talk about how white wine should really become kind of the wine of Israel, and like they should put the pedal to the metal for white wines. I think Pet Nat is perfect wine for Israel because of all of these things I'm mentioning.
Yeah, I so agree with you. My daughter said it's like a kombucha of wine.
It is. That's a great call. Your kids make very observant points, I see. Yeah, I think so. And it's kind of accurate also, because one of the things about it is that, to go back to the natural winemaking idea, is that it's kind of the theme with Pet Nat. It's like whatever happens, happens. Right. It's less intervention, I would say, with the winemaker. They don't treat it really with sulfur. And a really interesting point, by the way, as opposed to, the most famous of sparkling wines, champagne. Champagne is typically made from non-aromatic grapes. We know, like Chardonnay. Pet Nat and this one specifically is made from. Made from an aromatic grape. I'm pulling it up. It's made from Semillon, mostly Semillon, and then I wrote a touch. I think I found 9% of Muscat of Alexandria. Also very, very.
Are you talking about
aromatic.
Are you talking about the rosé? Because I saw there was a white as well. There were two Pet Nats. I bought the rosé, but I saw that there were two.
I didn't even know there were two. I only thought this was the 2020. What is it? 23, right?
Yeah.
I didn't know there were two. It's called
Pétillant. Yeah.
I'm looking at the bottle right now.
When I was
did not know that. It was, of course, rose colored. It was like had a pinkish hue, but it was really fun wine. Again, just like at our table, everyone loved it, and it was very aromatic, and the bubbles aren't as intense as you find as in like traditional method sparkling wines, or even Prosecco or something like that. It's a softer, and I think it's really just an interesting drink. I mean, you may not even realize it's wine almost when the first time, if I poured this for someone who didn't know what it was and asked them to identify it, I wouldn't necessarily think they immediately would think this is wine. Someone who's not, you know what I mean? There's something different about it. It's almost a little more beer-like in a sense, because it's hazy and cloudy, and it's got a different kind of complexity to it. And part of that reason also is because it's undergoing the fermentation in the bottle. You probably noticed this by the time you got to the end. There's all the sediment in it. That's the dead yeast.
Yeah, it was like almost like little crystals.
Right, and so you have that haziness to it, and that that different complexity to it. I love
I
it. I
thought it
love it.
was just, first of all, very well priced and
Right.
really just a shock. I told you earlier it was the shock of my Seder and everyone else. We all were like, what is this? I, I,
That's
I'll tell you something.
yeah, and I think because of that, I think, and because especially because it is rose colored, I think you can, as you saw, you can use that for a Seder cup, and it's lower alcohol and really refreshing. I think the third glass is a
Yeah.
perfect glass for that.
So I actually
That
would have
takes
never
much
ever
sense.
bought a pet knot before. I mean, probably maybe once I read your article, I would have, but I would never have bought a pet knot for Pesach. But I was actually at Bat Shlomo in Zichron Yaakov about 4 months ago, and I was sitting with the winemaker there. His name is Ari Errol. I don't know if you know him.
I
And
do.
he pulls out a bottle and he said, I've been playing with some of the indigenous grapes from Israel. And this was the Dabuki grape. Have you heard of a Dabuki grape? So it's one of these ancient grapes. I guess through DNA they were able to recreate this grape. And he said, I just made my first pet knot. I love for you to try it. And so he pulled it out, and it was like this, almost like a shock. I had heard over the years of this idea of a pet knot, and then having that at Bat Shlomo with Ari, I said, "Oh wow!" And then when I saw Dalton made one, I said, "This is going to be great for the Seder," and that was really my impetus for trying it.
Right. I at I think it was at the Jewish Link event. I really spent a good deal of time at the Dalton table, and with Guy Eschel, the winemaker, and with and drinking all their wines, and really, I that just they poured me that, and I was like, and I've had them before, and I've had the Dalton in the past, and I guess I just like forget about it. It's kind of off the radar a little bit. There are some other Israeli ones I can think of. Jezreel has made one
Fantastic.
for some time.
Yaakov Oria made one.
Agawaria. I think
Hmm.
Yafo makes one. I'm pretty sure, which I have not. Maybe I did have that. My memory is not. That's why I write everything down. You don't have to write things down. I write everything down. And by the way, I figured that when I put out a new written piece, that you got some kind of your thing started buzzing, or that you would know. I was
I am
shocked you
so
haven't read
sorry.
it.
You
It's
know
been out
what?
for like
I am going to start reading your pieces, being that I need to be well read on the new Kenny Friedman wine reviews. I need to, and all of what he writes, I should start looking.
yeah. I think I've someone criticized me once on the fact that I don't really write reviews, and then he was criticizing that I should really give scores and these kind of things. We should talk
But
about that
you
at
and I
some
don't like
point after the
scores.
scores. No, I don't. And you know from reading things I write
Yeah,
more history and maybe even the science of it. The background of it. That I like to try to give people insight into this because I can put and this is a perfect example as to why I do that, because if I put this up and I just say I use all the standard wine words to it, what about that is anything different than anything else you're reading? This is a different wine.
it
It's a
is.
different
So
wine.
just give us a little bit of the background, since I did not read your thing yet, and maybe you're just going to say, go read my thing. But I'd love to hear, just because a lot of us are going to be listening to us. We're driving, we're on the road. We don't have time to just pull over and look at your Instagram. What?
Well, I covered a lot of the main points of what I wrote about. It was so fresh in my mind. I wrote it at midnight last night, and it was very fresh in my mind. I covered the main points. I just pulled it up, and the name was Christian Chaussard, who accidentally ended up with wine fermenting in the bottle, led him down to the rabbit hole. So I wrote just a little more of the science of it, or the winemaking of it, is that Pét-Nat excludes the secondary fermentation of champagne. So there's no added dosage. There's no the sugar and yeast that's added afterwards. Like that doesn't happen
It's
with
really a
Pét-Nat.
wild
And
fermentation.
yeah, and so like that's why you were mentioning when you were talking about our Earl, and he's using Dabuki, and he's using something like that. That makes so much sense, and he's probably just the natural yeast that's on the tabuki, and that's awesome, I think, because that's like you're really drinking the essence of Israel then, because like the natural yeast on an indigenous grape.
It really felt like that.
So cool.
I really felt so connected to the land in a way that I hadn't felt before after having that tabuki.
And you were drinking
it in the land. Looking over those old Rothschild vineyards. If you've ever been to the Bat Shlomo little tasting room there, it like looks right over these old Rothschild vineyards. I believe they're the oldest vineyards, or one of the oldest vineyards in all of Israel. And yeah, it does have this very connecting to the land in a unique way kind of feel.
That's very cool. Another point I made that I didn't mention yet is that I did mention that it's kind of like not as sharp, bubbly type of idea, but there's also a lower pressure in the bottle. And something you'll notice when you buy Pet Nat is that what looks different about the top of it, it's corked differently, right? You don't see the standard champagne giant cork in it and the wire cage holding it down. Why? And instead, you'll see what's called like a crown cap, which is normally used on beer. And why can you get away with that? It's because the pressure is half the pressure that you'll find in champagne.
That's amazing. Actually, we had a problem opening it because who has a beer opener for Pesach?
Well, I did, but I guess I'm in that percentage of people that do. It's not for beer though. Last year I had the kosher, what was it?
Yes,
cider or something like that. Kind of like, yeah. So that, so I specifically had it for that. Anyway, you don't ever want to be caught off guard,
well,
Rabbi.
Thank God I had this brand new haiku bottle opener that I got as a recommendation from my great friend Kenny, and it had a beer opener on it because you don't need anything else. That's what you said.
Well, that has that, and that has the back of it.
You don't need anything else, as you said.
You don't need anything else, and it fits cleanly in your pocket. By the way, while it's on my mind, I was in the back at Kiddush at some point, and I saw an old friend of mine, and he was introducing me. He's a wine guy to another friend of his, and the other guy's like, "Listen, I have a question for you." He said, "What bracha do you make?" Because they were obviously arguing about it before I came in. They're like, "What bracha do you make on cognac?" I'm sure you know the answer to this. And I was like caught off guard a little bit, and I was like, "Not sure." He said, when you walked in, you looked like a religious enough guy, and I heard you know wine, but obviously looks can be deceiving. I'm like, that's accurate. So, but then of course we thought about it, and I'm like, it's shahakol, and maybe, I mean, you can give more insight as to why, I'm sure, but it's interesting that brandy and cognac, which get more play on Pesach, are shahakol and not hagavan. Hagavan is such a unique bracha specific to wine, and it's only really for that. And I was even thinking about the fact that like something like olive oil, which is a very it has a high standard, or I don't know what category to call it, it's still shahakol, right? It's not borei pri hazayis, or would that be the
that's interesting.
I guess synthetically. But
it has to be wine to be hagafen. It was what you're saying, and
right. And it has to, exactly. It doesn't, and right, it doesn't have the essence of the wine anymore. It doesn't have the taste of the wine, at least. But another thing I was reading, because I was so curious about it. After Yontiv, I looked it up, and the distillation process is such an interesting thing. What's happening there, and as it applies to halacha, is very interesting also, because it's constantly going through reboilings to distill the alcohol from the rest of the product, right? And it's actually going through a cooking process, which renders it different halachically than wine, because it's getting boiled from like the outset. I need to read more about it, but I just think it's very interesting. And anyway, but the answer is it's shahakol for all of you listening.
Yes. Cognac and Pesach.
Did you have any?
We don't get any cognac in Montreal, so it's just not an option.
I did not have any this year. I actually have, usually on Pesach, I will have a bottle of cognac around or whatever, and it's very enjoyable. And this year, I think we spoke about it at some point. At one of the events, I tasted a bunch of new brandies on the market, and very interesting and really good. So I think that's another area that I'll hopefully be expanding soon as we go deeper into
Well,
the
it's
world of
as we
social wine.
both see that it's just right now, it's really emerging in a way that it hasn't in the past.
Right. It's so cool. And I think this, what we spoke about today, the Pét Nat is a perfect example of that. And it's actually going backwards in some ways because it's less intervention and more simple winemaking, but it's just about the experimentation and all these
Yeah,
things that could be. And I love that this is an Israeli wine, and there was continuing with our theme of Israeli wine for Pesach, which we did very much. And there are plenty of other wines I could talk about. We just both kind of fell upon this for good reason because it's fun and delicious and Israeli. And this really
absolutely.
stood out to me
And I think
because
also as the
it's
summer comes in,
different.
and maybe we'll do a one on just rosés and whites, because you already summer, it's warmer. We think rosés, whites, and the Pét Nat is a perfect summer wine.
Absolutely, absolutely. I just this morning I saw our friend Josh Rinderman from Essa Wine in South Africa. He's about to release his 2024 rosé.
Yes.
Remember he's in the Southern Hemisphere, so and
Well,
it
I
looks
really
delicious
enjoyed last year's
for
Altira.
that
I
range.
happen to like
So
his whites, his Altira from the past. So I'm
yeah,
excited to try his rosé. I don't think he's ever had a rosé. Okay.
he had a rosé last year. He calls it Live and Love. But this one, as I mentioned to him, I'm like, this looks night and day from literally night and day because last year's was dark and fruity, that style, and this year is more the Provençal style, like very light. And he told me it's very much that style. So it'll be a real departure from what he did last year. And he's a budding young superstar, learned under the
Yes.
great Benjamin Kantz. So
Yes. One day
expect
you
big
and I have
things
to
from
just
him.
sit in Binyamin's garden and have an uncanny, off the cuff conversation with him, and learn and just glean from the Rebbe himself.
God willing. Yeah, I think I told you this that one year he added in a little safer that he wrote, and I like wanted to make sure I got one of them because he's such a unique thinker and he's really a different person in of all
Absolutely.
the winemakers that I'm lucky to know. I mean, a lot of them are so talented and unique in their own right, but
He's something
he's
special,
different
and
from
I do
everyone.
believe that kavana has a lot to do with wine, and the kavana on that wine is something unique.
Right. It's a he writes on his bottle about the connection he has to the mitzvah of making a wine for kiddush, and like you said, the kavana from the outset of him doing it. I always considered how when you make tzitzis, like you really have to have like l'shem mitzvah tzitzis in your head all the time. And like my mind wanders all the time. I'm not the ideal guy to.
Yes.
You have to do that with matzah also, right? You really have to be real kavan on that. I'm like wrong guy, but he's the right guy for that because he's so focused on
But
the mitzvah of making
I
wine.
know that
You taste it
wines
in the wine.
the grapes are so subtle, and they are attracted to everything around it. I mean, right? If you have cherries around it, you're going to have some kind of cherry in your wine. If you have tropical fruits around, I mean, they're so attracted to everything around it. So of course they're attracted to the kavana.
It's the
Yes, the
terroir
terroir of
of
kavana. I
kavana.
love that.
Yes, and it picks it up. There's no question. Um, yeah,
But definitely,
amazing.
I would highly recommend, if you see that Dalton Pet Nat, just pick it up and try it, because that
Yes,
was just something special, unique, different. As somebody, I've never had a non-kosher bottle of wine in my life. I've only had kosher wine, so I can only tell you what the kosher world has, and this is something unique. And these Pet Nats are literally game changers.
I agree, and I think that Dalton is just continually unheralded. The guy is a great winemaker. Alex Haruni is at the helm there, and he's a highly energetic and he's a great ambassador for the brand. And um, I can't recommend trying their wines across the board are good value and well made.
So thank you, Tony. My
Definitely, if you
I'm
can
on the
get
road
it.
with my entire family, so it's about to get very loud in here. So I think maybe we should sign off
Yeah,
while we can.
yeah, it was great. It was great to catch up and review this great wine, and
Let's do this
look
again.
to
This
speak
is
next week.
fantastic, and I'm so happy that we were able to kind of slip this in. And for all of you who are listening, and you got
Yeah,
to this point with us, send us your questions. Kosher Wine Podcast at gmail.com. Send us your comments. We will send us your ideas. Maybe you have an idea for somebody that you want to have us interview, that you want to know more about, you want to learn more about. We can either talk about that person or have them on. And we are looking for your feedback because we cherish it and love it in a way like we coddle your feedback like little babies.
it's so
You should
true.
see you should see
It's so
Kenny's
true.
face light up every single time he gets a comment from someone. So if you know Kenny, just send him a comment because you're going to make his day.
It's so true. I can't argue with you. I can't argue with you. There's a little serotonin is released in my brain every time I get a comment on the
Okay,
podcast. So,
great speaking with you. Have a wonderful Shabbos.
all right. Enjoy the rest of your trip, and we'll see you soon.